All right, guys, we're going to talk about changes in our sine and cosine graphs now with a horizontal stretch or shrink. We also call these changes in the period of the graph. So I'm just going to do this basic form of sine or cosine. And you know the period of the graph is going to change when there is a new number, so a coefficient inside the parentheses. We call it the argument. So this inside the parentheses of the trig function, that's the argument. And there's going to be a change in period when there's a number in there. So I'm going to do an example with this as we go through it. We'll graph sine of 2x. Now, way back in the beginning of the year, we would say we've got a number inside the parent function. This would be a change to the x values. So that 2 is going to change the x values. And inside, we would say, is going to be the opposite changes. So all of our x values for this one would be multiplied by 1/2. So a couple ways you could do this. If you wanted to go back to our sine, all of the points for that. So my original points for sine would be as follows. I'm going to do a t-chart. A lot of you guys have been doing that, and it's great. We also did this beginning of the year. So for sine, we would have 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. And our original y values were 0, 1, 0, -1, 0. So now we're changing the x values, this 2, all of our x's are going to be multiplied by 1/2. So I'll get a 0, pi over 4, pi over 2, 3 pi over 4. Remember those fractions. I just multiply either numerator or denominator, wherever the number is. And then 2 pi times 1/2 just turns into pi. So that's one way we could do it. These values here would be our final coordinates. Or sometimes what I like to do is just go to the graph and actually just like graph the original sine function. I'm going to change our scale on here. I'm going to put 1 right here. So sine normally looks like this. So every 2 dashes on the graph, I'm going to put one of our key points. But now, instead of going, this would normally be to 2 pi. Instead of that, now the new period of the graph is going to be 1/2 of the value. So now my graph really goes to pi. So 1/2 of that would be pi over 2. 1/4 of that we could say would be pi over 4. So we could kind of figure out our points that way. But there's 2 options there. So you can use that value to multiply your x's, or a way we can always find the period is by multiplying 2 pi times 1 over b, or dividing 2 pi by the b value. So I'm going to do one more fairly quick example here, and then you guys will try out your practice. All right, so I'm going to do a cosine. We're going to make this a really big graph of x over 8. So here our b value, another way we could write this is cosine of 1/8 times x. So b equals 1/8. So rather than writing all the points, this time I'm going to find what the period of the graph is, which is how long a cycle. So to find the period, I do 2 pi over b, which is 2 pi divided by 1/8. And when you have a fraction, we multiply by the reciprocal. So my new period is 16 pi. So again, what we could do with that, and again, I'm going to rescale this. I'll make this 1. So I'm just going to graph what the cosine curve would normally look like. It would normally be 0, 1. And I'm just going to put our key points at specific units. So I'm just going to do every 2 lines and my key points. But now, instead of ending at 2 pi, one cycle goes all the way to 16 pi. So from there, I could figure out what these other values are. So half of 16 pi would be 8 pi in the middle. Half of 8 pi would be 4 pi over here. So we have 4 pi, 8 pi. If we keep the pattern going, this would be 12 pi. So we could figure out all those key points. One more time if you want to do that T-chart. Here's our original cosine values. And we would do the opposite, the reciprocal of 1/8. So we're multiplying all of the x's by 8. So 0, 4 pi, 8 pi, 12 pi, 16 pi is what we have on our graph. All right, guys, good luck. As always, let us know any questions. Oh, before I leave, I wanted to do a quick demo on Desmos. This is a great way to check your answers. So I'm going to just type in that one example I just did. We'll see here, the graph doesn't quite show me the whole thing. I'm going to zoom out. And still, it's kind of small. So I'm going to go to this little wrench and change my window. So x-axis, really helpful here. If instead of telling me just these decimals, it actually told me pi. So I'm going to make the step, let's make the step 4 pi. We saw that on our graph. That was helpful. Now the y-axis, I don't need these 40 to 50s. Let's go from -5 to 5. And there we go. So we can see one full period goes to 16 pi. And if you kind of scroll along there, it'll give you these key points for you. So very helpful. All right, guys, good luck.